The starting quarterback got in a fight. That's the story from Falcons training camp today. I'm Joe Patrick reporting from. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, that it was kind of funny that Michael Penix Jr. was in the middle of a brawl, and when I say he was in the middle of it, I mean he was basically at the bottom of a dog pile at Flowery Branch in the team's joint practice against the Tennessee Titans. I will actually do an official introduction here real quick. My name is Joe Patrick. I cover the Falcons for 92.9 The Game. I've been doing that since 2022, and we wrapped up joint practices today in Flowery Branch with the Tennessee Titans, obviously visiting, and they will be playing the Falcons' second preseason game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium this Friday. And if you pay any attention at all to the Falcons, especially on today, or if you're listening to this on Thursday, yesterday, you will know exactly what the storyline is, which is the fact that Michael Penix Jr. was in the middle of this brawl, like we were talking about. Very interesting situation, and I think kind of overshadows, obviously, a lot of what happened at practice, not in a bad way whatsoever. It could have been in a bad way, if he's in the middle of a brawl and he, gets an injury, hurts his hand or something. Thank goodness that didn't happen. I believe he had only thrown like 2 pass attempts in the practice session so far, at least in the 11-on-11 portion. By the time that the fight started, and I'll just gotta give you my perspective on it. I would really encourage you to tune in to 92.9 The Game. If you are listening to this Wednesday night, or if it's Thursday, Mike Johnson from the morning shift will probably have already talked about it. I know he's going to give kind of a play-by-play breakdown of what he saw, because he had a better angle and view of the whole situation than I did from the sideline perspective. It's actually kind of ironic. Like I was standing in the end zone right in the corner where Ray McLeod had just caught like a 40-yard touchdown pass, or the referees officially ruled him down like the 3-yard line, because there were some defensive backs back there that have ultimately caught up to him and kind of two-hand touched him to blow the play dead. I think he probably could have fought and probably would have fought his way into the end zone, just given how tough a runner Ray is, which I don't think he gets enough credit for, by the way. So he catches the ball, and I'm thinking, okay, wow, big play. I'm writing that down in my notebook. I put my head down, and all of a sudden, I hear some commotion. I look up, and there's just a mass of humanity on the field. So the provoking action at that point had taken place. We did talk to Michael Penix after practice, and he did describe a little bit about how things got started, which was basically him talking some what, and not necessarily starting the crap talk, but maybe giving it back. I think giving the crap talk back to guys after he had already been kind of smack talked a little bit by Tennessee Titans. And listen, the Titans, you kind of expected this. I think the Falcons as a team probably had a talk before practice even started, knowing that they really took it to the Titans the day before. You could even hear the Titans players in some of their post-practice media at Tuesday afternoon talking about how that was a crap practice that they had. They got to be better, et cetera, and that they were going to come out swinging. And little did we know that was going to be literally, although maybe we should have predicted that it would be literally, because these things do tend to happen, especially on this second day of joint practices that teams have. I heard on another podcast that Kyle Shanahan doesn't even like to do the second day of joint practice at all. He only likes to get the first day in, because after the practice, both teams are going to go in and look at the film, and the players are going to get chewed out by the coaches who demand more, regardless of what happens, even if you do think you had a good practice. And that's going to make tensions even higher for the following day. And ultimately, or it oftentimes does, devolve into something like we saw. The good news is that it didn't devolve to the point where the teams had to really cancel practice and it got really ridiculous. It did spread around, like after the big brouhaha that Michael Penix was involved in at relatively the beginning of practice. I would say it was more like we were about 25% of the way through practice and done all the 7-on-7 work and stuff, but team had just started. And after that happened, then, so I guess to describe it a little more, so there's 2 parallel fields, right, that are playing, and you got the Falcons offense and then the Titans offense on the other one, and on the sideline where the middle between the 2 fields is the Titans player offense, and then the Falcons defense, and then the Titans offense would have been furthest away from where this action was happening. And so when I looked up, I could see Falcons defensive players on the offensive field. I saw Jesse Bates in there, trying to pry bodies off, basically, just like getting in there. It wasn't every single defensive player. Like the players who were playing on that defensive field were stayed on the field and maintained themselves. But basically, most of the players who were on that Falcons and Titans shared sideline were spilled onto the field and we're helping to break stuff up, and then or maybe contributing to the fight, I guess, depending on the person. And then after that, there was like some pretty like Casey Washington, I believe, got into it with somebody. There was something that popped off in special teams. There was something that popped off on the other field as well. Chris Lindstrom got into it a little bit with the Titans defensive lineman. That never got physical, but I was waiting for it to get physical. This one was happening right in front of me in the red zone. The Falcons had, I think, run the ball in for a score or something. Lindstrom somehow is on the left side of the field, even though he's the right guard. And he's you can see him kind of talking to a Titans player. And Lindstrom kind of like puts his hands back, and I'm like, oh, is he actually going to go at this guy? And then he just shoots him up just to give him like the, we just scored the touchdown right in the Titans guy's face. And after that, I thought the Titan guy might just shove him, but he didn't. So, but there was like a lot of that stuff that kind of started happening in the immediate aftermath of the big fight. But ultimately, it was, I think, a productive practice for these guys. And it was ultimately, I think, everything that happened on the field that we typically would be paying attention to with these joint practices, the completion percentages from, Michael Penix, who's catching the footballs, who's stepping up for Darnell Mooney, and we could talk more about him. There was a little bit of kind of maybe newsy stuff about him this morning, but ultimately, I think the big takeaway from today's practice was, I think frankly, the camaraderie that was built within the Falcons team and the bonding that happens in a fight, and it's at those moments where you take to your teammates' defense, and it can, I think, unite guys. Caleb McGarry and Matthew Bergeron were the first ones to really kind of see that there was something happening with Penix and go after some Titans players, which is great. Those I think are probably the two offensive linemen that you would expect to be doing that kind of thing, and we got to hear from Michael Penix afterwards. I'm not going to try to like paraphrase everything that he said, but again, I always do, would highly recommend just hearing it from the horse's mouth and going to the Falcons YouTube channel where they have all the press conferences and you can hear what he had to say. I also, on my X timeline, J.A. Patrick 200, you could see some of the quotes that Penix gave where he was, I think, still fired up and feeling pretty passionate about who he is and, like representing himself well, where he's from, having respect for himself. And I think that's what it kind of comes down to, is he just felt like he was being disrespected and maybe dished out some disrespect himself. And that's when things went a little haywire. But I think that ultimately you come out of that practice and you feel better about the Falcons just as a team. And it doesn't really matter what else was actually happening, because we've seen this team go out and be dominant against the Titans the day before. And I would say that just generally speaking, along those lines, I would say the Titans were far, far better. They like the extra juice that they brought to today's practice, they really needed. And I would say it was about 50-50, which means that the Titans were getting their fair share of wins against the Falcons, whether that be the Titans offense versus the Falcons defense or vice versa. I thought Cam Ward, by the way, was way better. I know this is a Falcons podcast, but he is the number one overall pick. There is some public interest in Cam Ward. And Tuesday, I don't want to be too hard on the guy. I thought he was like really pretty terrible. And it's not to say that I think he's like a terrible quarterback, but it was just a bad practice. He was putting the ball in harm's way over and over again, thrown to some guys who weren't home, throwing right to some Falcons defensive backs who were, robbing and just surprising him in some of their zone looks. And he was much, much more protective over the ball today. I don't think, he did have one interception, which was an attempted throwaway. He just didn't throw the ball far enough, and D. Alford was able to snag it and toe tap his feet in bounds for the interception. But that's kind of a fluky type of thing. Cam Ward was far better today, and it was just generally very competitive. Calvin Ridley also, I know there's probably a lot of Falcons fans who have interest in him. He looks great. He looks like obviously going to be a weapon for them. Looks like as good as I've seen him. And he's kind of been through some weird years since leaving the Falcons, and I think that he has an opportunity with Tennessee if he can get consistent quarterback play. Certainly, any shortcomings that he has is not because of his own individual ability. He looked really good today. Did want to answer some of your questions from today. I do want to say tomorrow we'll have another podcast coming where I want to kind of dig a little bit into what these Falcons defensive coaches have been talking about, because I do find it interesting with how Jeff Ulbrich is saying that there's 3 or 4 positions that are up for grabs, and what positions might those be? As soon as he said that, media members were like, okay, free safety, nickel, and he's like, yeah, and someone said inside linebacker, and he goes, no, and then he basically stopped. But we'll think about that, and then also just kind of get into kind of more about this defensive philosophy that they're putting on show. One bit of news I wanted to talk about from today, again, that was related to Darnell Mooney, who we mentioned just a second ago. I've been hearing some like weird things about him. I saw his injury happen right in front of me on that first day of practice. We've talked about this before. He came down, he was diving, laying out for a ball, came down that shoulder. I don't know, and I haven't asked. I probably should ask. I will ask soon if like the coaches talk about probably not diving for things, because I started looking into some different types of injuries that I thought he could potentially have. And I noticed I did an AI search for it, which it's just nice because it just like pulls a bunch of examples and stuff. And I am noticing that a lot of these kinds of shoulder related stuff, like a lot of that, especially with receivers, happens in either OTAs or early in training camp when they don't have padding that can absorb some of those blows. So anyway, that's a little off topic. The news from him today was that Michael Penix actually kind of let it slip, I guess, that he was. Someone asked him about his offensive weapons, basically. So he just basically started rambling through or going through, all the different receivers and running backs that he has. And he mentioned, Darnell Mooney, he's got this and that, and and he said, we'll get him back this season. I think he'll be ready to go for week 1, or intimated that he would be back for week 1. And then he immediately after he said that, he kind of says, but his recovery is going well. But I can't really talk about it any more than that. So we'll see where he is. I will reiterate, because there have been some rumors that are going around about what actually the injury is, and we don't have any indication of what it is. The team is under no obligation to say as much. And I think they rightly are just trying to keep the fog of war going, and not letting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers kind of know exactly what his status is. But I would say that, I believe it was the second day of practice, the day after his injury happened, he was out of the field. And we have not seen him since, but, he was just out on the field, walking around, not in a sling, not in a cast, not in anything. He had a jacket on. So he could have had some bracing. He probably did, I would imagine, underneath that. But you would think that if it were like, one of the rumors I've heard is a collarbone issue, and you would think that if there was a collarbone issue, then he would definitely have been in a sling, especially that next day. He got up when he had the injury. He got up, and I could see you could tell he was hurting just because he laid down on the field for a while, and then he went back and he was kind of working his shoulders like that. And again, it's like, I've just heard the collarbone thing, and I feel like if you're moving your arms like that, well, you wouldn't be able to do that if you had a serious collarbone injury. So I'm kind of skeptical that that's what it is, but we'll see. I think that what we can say is that his week 1 status right now is definitely in question, despite the fact of what Michael Penix says. And we'll just keep tracking this. I don't expect to see him. I think the earliest we would see him is during the practice of week 1, the practice week of week 1 ahead of that game. And we could even not even see him in practice really during that game, except for maybe, later in the week, and then he's able to play. And there are, I think, legitimate questions about, the connection that he'll have with Michael Penix, considering they didn't get any reps at all last year until Michael Penix was thrown in week 16 or whatever it was for practice. That Wednesday practice would have been the first time they were ever really thrown to each other. Penix did say that he went out to California and had many throwing sessions with him, because Penix was trying to get caught up with these guys and do some of that. So that is good, but still not. It wasn't throwing in the form of a live practice or a game or game type situation, except for those final 3 games of the season. So we'll continue to post that, or keep you posted on that. Let's go into. I just wanted to pull some questions. I totally forgot to put out the call for questions, but we did get several in, so we'll just go through these and then get out of here. I do have to run here pretty quickly. I will be on the Falcoholic here. Uh, Adizi Dadon. I think this guy also. I had trouble with his name the last time we did a mailbag. He has, will Kirk be traded? I think he could be traded, but it depends. Like right now, there's no team that's calling asking for him. So if when that happens, I think that the Falcons will be the first team that get a call. If it's a team that loses their quarterback that feels like they are a playoff contender. I think that the team that's most interesting right now is obviously the Rams, with going through the neck issues with Matthew Stafford. That's a serious thing. They've kind of played it up like he's going to be ready, and then he's not practiced. So that's definitely a situation worth keeping tabs on. But you would think that if they really were, if they really thought that Stafford's season was in danger at this point, like they weren't going to be able to rely on him, then they may have already started, putting something in motion. And maybe they have talked behind the scenes. Who knows? But that will basically, well, if he's traded, will all depend on how it happens, how the league shakes out. And I would also say, like, the Falcons are totally comfortable, like we've been talking about, keeping him. The roster is financially set at this point, and if they were to trade Kirk, it wouldn't be for some financial reason to like get his money off the books. That's basically set in stone. It was part of the plan when they signed him and drafted Penix. Like they were okay with allocating all of that capital towards the quarterback position between these two players, with the expectation that they were going to get a certain level of quarterback play. Now, that obviously didn't happen last year after the injury to Kirk occurred because of that. But I think we can expect them to have that level of quarterback play. And the good news is that they've got insurance in the most important position in sports. It's such a fascinating topic because the value output of a football team is so bottlenecked at that quarterback position. Like the quarterback is really, it's like the aperture. It's like the thing in a camera that opens up to the lens. Like that quarterback is what allows you to get the value that you have in your other positions on the offensive side of the ball, and even on the defensive side of the ball, because the quarterback even helps, is important in dictating the flow of the football game, and how often the defense is on the field, and et cetera, and the game state that they're in. So it's so important for them to have insurance in that position. I think that that's why they value Kirk so much. It's why they weren't just ever going to part with him, especially like to be cut. It's kind of funny to think about that in retrospect at this point, that was like a lot of people thought that was a possibility. CA Atlas Prime says, what undrafted players do you think would have the best chance of making the roster? Well, if you saw my roster projection show, I had Kobe Bryant on that roster. If I did it 3 days later, I would not have him on that roster at this point, and I will do another roster projection going into next week, and he's not going to be on that roster. I'll tell you that, because he is out with an injury now, and ultimately he's week to week with a hamstring. That could be the rest of training camp, and if he's just not played, you can't carry him. Raheem Morris said it's a shame because he was really kind of on the rise, and that's why I put him on my roster. Not necessarily even because of what he had done to that point, but it was more of like where I was projecting him going based on the way he was rising within the ranks of that Falcons secondary in that point in time. But right now it doesn't look like that. So with that said, I think the one I would put on there now is Joshua Gray. Saw him taking some backup offensive line snaps today at practice in place of Elijah Wilkinson. And I think that for an offensive lineman, for offensive line development, I think teams understand that they're going to need to carry some bodies there if they really want to put that time that it takes to develop those players. And I think with Joshua Gray, who can potentially be a center for you, that's a position that they really need some help in. I don't think they're going to rely on Joshua Gray to be their backup center this year, but I'm just talking about down the line to potentially be the Ryan Neuzil that Ryan Neuzil has been so far. So I think Joshua Gray is the one that I would put on there. Nick Nash, obviously, another high-profile UDFA that he may plays in that game against the Lions. It's just it's hard to get into that wide receiver group right now for the Falcons. A lot of good players playing there in that position. Go next. Chance Pants says Clark Phillips still injured. First team, second team. Yeah, he is injured. I believe he's got a rib injury, which occurred. I believe it was a week ago, Monday or Tuesday. I think it was a week ago, Tuesday. So it was early last week. He suffered this injury, and it's really a shame because that kept him out of the intra-squad scrimmage that the team had on that Wednesday. The following day, kept him out of the Lions preseason game, kept him out of both of these joint practices, and it sounds like he won't be back for the preseason game either. And I don't even know if he's going to practice next week. And so it's going to be hard for him to make the roster if he's not playing. It's just that simple, and especially if he's not playing and he's already kind of in a position where he's fighting for jobs, and other players like Natron Brooks, for example, is starting to get really important reps for this team, even kind of rotating in with some of the starters. So I had to actually add Natron Brooks off the roster, even though I said at the time in that roster projection, he hasn't done anything to deserve getting moved down other than just other players kind of rising and usurping him. And I think the Falcons thinking that they can keep him around and other teams wouldn't come after him. But right now, I think the Falcons are pretty invested in him and like him a lot and think that he can add something to the team to the point where they will carry Natron Brooks. And I think Clark Phillips I think he's on the chopping block right now, and something in that dynamic has to change if he wants to make the 53-man. And by the way, I should say with Clark could be one of those guys who gets waived, and the Falcons could pick him up. We'll see. Other teams might not like the size issue that Clark deals with either. Sickies says, does it seem like we are using more play action this year in camp? For sure. Can't remember if I've talked about this on a podcast episode, but I know I've either talked about it on a pod or a radio hit or tweeted it. But yes, play action is going to be back. I don't know if it's going to be back. I'm not predicting it will be back to the extent that of like Arthur Smith level play action, which is like a ton, or like the Kyle Shanahan level play actions. But I do think that they will do a lot more than they did last year. It will still be out of pistol and their gun, their gun sets. Like that's what this offense is going to be. But I think they just have a lot more faith in Michael Penix being able to save himself, basically, if things go awry with the blocking or whatnot, that he can either survive taking a hit in the pocket or escape the pocket. And for that reason, I think they will use more play action, and it will definitely help them because when you've got a running back as good as Bijan Robinson is, that's going to help you a lot. That's going to pull defenders out of position. Buzz Takes says, are we in trouble at wide receiver if Mooney's out for longer than expected? Worried that teams are going to blanket Drake London. It doesn't help. Darnell Mooney showed that he's maybe not like an elite top quality receiver, but like whatever the level is below that. He's got and he's got traits that other players don't necessarily have in this Falcons receiver group. Just with his, it's his speed, but it's also, I think this is the underrated thing, it's his deceleration ability. His ability to, and I think it's just because he is so he's slight, he's just like very slender. He doesn't have as much mass, like muscle mass that he's carrying, so he can get to his top speed and then really just stop his top speed faster than pretty much any Falcon, in my opinion. That difference from his top speed to stopping. And that's why I think we saw him have so much success on those stop routes, those comeback routes that are like those 20-yard down and then stop on a dime and just, have the ball coming to you with anticipation. That's the kind of thing Mooney is great at. I think it's the kind of thing that Penix could really, really excel at as well, with his ability to anticipate. And I don't think he's going to be out like too much longer than expected. Although my expectation this entire time has been that he's basically going to miss training camp. Ever since like Raheem Morris kind of walked back the initial, going from he's going to be out 3 weeks to it's going to be 3 weeks and then we'll see. Ever since that point, I've kind of been like, okay, well, we'll see if he's ready for week 1. And I'm kind of in that same mindset of like, he's just questionable for week 1. If he's not available, Casey Washington is definitely the guy who has kind of taken his spot, basically, who's going to be his clone. And Casey Washington has shown up really well in these last couple weeks. He's won that job with his performances in practices and shows the separation ability that they feel like they need in that X role. That's the quality that they're looking for in the for the Mooney role, the X role for this team. They want separators. They want separation. And that's what Casey Washington offers because he's got that high-end athleticism. Mike Drops asks, Coach Olberg said Rook will be a problem since once he pieces everything together. What exactly does he need to piece together? It's a good question, especially because they're running this attack style front. Like, he has more freedom to just kind of like be a savage, basically. like that's me paraphrasing, but that's kind of what Nate Ollie wants these guys to be, is just to wreak havoc. And I think that that's why it sets up really well for Rook and a lot of these other players, Dorless as well. Like all these young players, I think it just allows them to use their athletic traits more than mental or technical. And they can develop the mental and technical over the course of their careers as they get more reps and start to be able to do more things. But since they are more one-dimensional now at this stage of their careers, and they will be, I think this scheme sets up really well for them. I think where Rook needs to show improvement, basically, or just show that he can hang, is an ability to like take on double teams, to really be like a run defender in that sense, because he has these athletic gifts. But when you look at him, he's kind of like, for as big as he is, not to say that he's like small in any way, obviously, but his lower half is like, it's not like Grady Jarrett, and Grady Jarrett, it wasn't necessarily like some like great run stopper either, but considering Grady's general size, he was good at taking on blocks and being able to at least kind of, with a double team, you're really just hoping to occupy the two blockers and not give up ground. And that's what Rook needs to be able to show. And I think that with his general natural strength, I think he can do that, but he's going to need to show an ability to do it and an ability to do it consistently. I do think, though, that he has a very good chance of ultimately by the end of the season playing more snaps than any other defensive lineman in this group, just because he is so young. I think that just the youth in general is going to allow you to be more available over the course of 17 games than David Onyemata, even though Nate Ollie is like saying that everybody's sleeping on David Onyemata, and he's a fantastic player, a great defensive lineman, which I think he is as well. But I think Rook is probably going to have a pretty big season. And True Self, wrapping up here, True Self says, what's up with our middle defense? And do we have speedy wide receivers? Because that's going to be a problem. Again, to go back to Mooney, it does hurt to not have his speed on the field, but I think that there's generally enough speed between Casey Washington, who can go past guys, can stack corners. Kyle Pitts, for all the struggles that he's had, if he gets the right matchup, he can beat guys deep, and he even did that last year. Had the 2 touchdown catches against the Bucks, kind of questionable coverages in those instances, but has done it against teams like the Panthers, did it against the Chiefs, had a big catch, getting behind the defense when he gets the right matchup. So I think the Falcons definitely still have those types of receivers, but I think that they will continue to try to find those receivers who have that Taylor Gabriel-like ability to break open games, who might not break the bank as well, but are players that Michael Penix could pair up really well with. And then with the middle defense, I assume you're kind of talking about just like the spine of the defense, like the tackles and the linebackers, and not so much the safeties, I guess. But Divine Diablo is a guy that gets under talked about relative to what the coaching staff clearly thinks of him, which they clearly love the guy. He has shown on tape, I think, like some good and some bad. The bad obviously being more in the run defense, having been a converted safety, but they can't stop talking about like just the smarts that he has. And for the position, the role, the linebacking role that he's going to have, where he has a lot of coverage responsibilities on top of run fits, I think that is a great thing for him, and we'll see. But I do worry. I think that the weakness of this Falcons team is going to be like kind of getting gashed in that area, and I think it's just because of this attack style front. To me, it feels like it can leave gaps. I was asking Nate Ollie about this when we spoke to him earlier this week. Don't remember. I think this may have been kind of after we had turned our cameras off, but he said linebackers have tended to like it, to like the kind of chaotic picture that it puts in front of them, because their job basically becomes to read the hole kind of similarly to the way a running back would read, where the hole is opening up, and then you just run to that hole, and typically you meet the ball carrier. So, but to be determined. So we'll see. But it should be interesting when things do eventually get kicked off, which I know we're all waiting for. And it'll be interesting to see who plays and who plays well this Friday night, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, when the Falcons and Titans meet up. I'm sure they'll be happy to see each other for the last time until potentially next season. So until then, we will also see you guys tomorrow, where we'll talk more about this, what Nate Ollie was talking about, this attack style front, what Jeff Ulbricht's talking about with the heart, mind, fist, and repping your style. We'll talk all about that tomorrow. So thanks for tuning in to Joe Patrick on Football.